and now things go on pretty much as well. If that happens, he wins and the West lose in terms of that game. Now that's a problem because these things always resolve to who's the winner and who's the loser. If he doesn't attain that, he will those things. He probably would escalate. That's a scary situation. How would he escalate and so on? So it's almost difficult to say, is it better that he wins or loses? Well, what I think, and we're going to find out the answer to those questions before the end of the summer, I think. And my own guess is that because they can't make it look like anybody wins or loses, that they have an armistice, or what I mean, a ceasefire, the way they had in Korea, and they just go the border lines and they say that that's just a temporary ceasefire. And maybe you can, and maybe it sticks. Who knows? I don't know. The second, so, okay, first question, does he win or lose? And how does that work? Second question is, what are the powers and cost of American sanctions? The power is, in other words, can you really shut down the Russian economy? Can you shut things down so that you have enough of an effect so that you change the outcomes? So everybody's looking at that. The Chinese are looking at that. Everybody's looking about what are the powers. The costs are significant too, because what we're doing is you're politicizing or weaponizing the financial and economic systems. So when you politicize it and freeze a country's assets, many other countries today are wondering, should they hold those bonds in the United States? Because if they get sanctioned, so many countries are neutral or against, they could get sanctioned, and that's a risk, and that could affect the capital markets. And it also produces great inefficiencies, which are economically costly, because you think, okay, where are the supply lines? Look at what's happened, and the efficiencies are not there. And so that's these sanctions and all of that are very, very costly. So we'll see. We're in the process of seeing that. So far the sanctions are not shutting down the Russian economy and so on, and they're not having a change in policy. It is a very important question, because sanctions are the United States' only unique power now, because the military power and the economic power has become more comparable than it was before. And so it's the unique thing. So
Specifically, right?
so that's important. And the third thing we will see, and we are seeing, is how the sides align, and basically into the allied powers and the Axis powers in Europe and in Asia. And we're seeing that. Who will support Russia? Who will deal with Russia? So when you look around, you can see, for example, which ones are neutral, which ones, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, Middle Eastern countries, and so on and so forth, are still dealing with Russia in ways, and have not. And so you'll see whether which countries on which side, which countries on the other side. All countries are increasingly being forced to pick a side and go into Asia in those countries. And I speak to leaders, I speak to most leaders, and they're saying, which side do I pick? Because I'm increasingly pick a side. When you see the president fly around the country, or you see representatives, fly around the world, and you see others flying around the world, that's basically, pick a side and here are the consequences. So that's what we're seeing now. And I think that before the end of the summer, that those questions will become clearer and lend for the next stage. The China situation is very concerning, because, as I say, Russia is not a comparable power. It's relatively economically, it's a minor power. And you need all of the powers. But China's a different story. And so we have that. Now, I know both American and Chinese leaders, and I think that they would say that it's very, very important to know where the red lines are, and not to cross the red lines to go into that kind of a conflict. And well, as you point out, Taiwan could be one of those situations. At some point, it will find some form of resolution. But I would say still the odds are that they won't cross the line for the military, but our risks of it are great. It's like two giants wrestling with each other 6 feet from the edge of a cliff. You can say, okay, but if you could go over that edge of the cliff too easily. And so that's what it looks like to me.
And the lack of effectiveness of these sanctions seen by China also, when they look at what they might do or not do, what kind of consequences are available, they might start, if this doesn't work, and what you've mentioned historically has happened with these types of sanctions, it certainly encourages some other forms of conflict to occur because there's less consequence that comes from there. Let's talk for 2 seconds, last two things, if I may, with you. I will come back to the individual at the end here because I think it's so important. And maybe touch on them now, but let's talk about inflation. From the 1990s to 2008, I think you described it as globalizing, digitizing, and booming by using debt. And now we're in a different world. We're in a beginning of a different winter where we've gone beyond what that experience is. And when you and I talked previously, you talked about the fact that we'd already hit this problem with our financial system in 2019 before COVID. But then when COVID came in, all of a sudden, these emergency powers were used and we printed 5 times the amount of money we actually needed to do to cover things. And that's where this inflation is coming from. Can you describe where the inflation is coming from? And then what should individuals do during a time of inflation? Do you see this as continuing? Right now, the Fed, as you know, is late to the party. They're trying to raise rates. Yesterday they raised them by 3/4 of a point, the most they've done in 28 years in a single time. But can they really raise it enough to stop inflation or without having a massive recession? Give us your view of what got us here and where do you think we're going and what can people do to protect?
What got us here is the injection of a lot of debt and money. It's a hype. In other words, you can hype it up. Think of it as, you've got somebody who's weak and whatever it is, and you give them the shot, and then that the shot of buying power. And if the amount of spending increases by more than the amount of production, then prices by definition go up. And so there was a massive amount of giving away checks and money. And people seem surprised that they get inflation. Well, they're going to spend that. Not going to increase very much in terms of the production. And so what is going to happen? The